Hey everyone, today we are going to tear down a video card. It's the 5070 Founders Edition. Aren't you excited? Is that what you wanted? So we're gonna look at the 9070s tomorrow, I think, when this video goes up, because the embargo for those lifts right after this one. But the 5070 is pretty interesting. So this is the Founders Edition model, and the reason it's interesting is not because of the price, availability, performance, or theoretical presence of theoretical ROPs. It's because it's a little bit smaller. So below this is the 5080 or 5090 cooler. Now the biggest change is that this is not a dual flow-through design. So this side is flow-through, and then this is just a standard, probably PCB in there. We're gonna find out when I take it apart. But that's completely blocked off. So it's back to the traditional approach to cooling. And the difference, as you can see with this disassembled 5080, that had the missing ROPs, the difference is that this one is dual flow through. And if you're wondering why this is taken apart, it's because we were trying to find the ROPs. Apparently they're in the computer. We couldn't find them, but they should be in there. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Montech HyperFlow series of liquid coolers. The Montech HyperFlow aims to compete with other affordable liquid coolers by fighting on price to performance. In our testing, cooler performance was comparable to others in its class. The ARGB HyperFlow has an illuminated pump block with RGB LED fans that have quality rubber bumpers for vibration damping. The cooler has a 6-year warranty and supports all modern Intel and AMD sockets, and you can learn more at the link in the description below. All right, so this one should be pretty simple today. We just want to open this up and see how they assembled it. It's important to know this stuff. We'll keep some track of what they're doing internally as well. So quick walk around of the card. It is smaller. We'll take a measurement in a second. Still 2 fans, but they are smaller fans. It's down to a traditional height slot rather than the elevation you get over the slot here where you can see that gap. So they've shortened it. The back is now a more traditional exhaust. So this is actually going to be a critical part of the design because since this side is blocked off now, this is just if you try to look through the fins, it's just a black metal wall. And that's on the back of the PCB probably. But because of that, this exhaust now becomes important again. And that is different from what NVIDIA did here, where there is no exhaust. I mean, it's just the I/O and that's it, because they'd rather push it straight through the card than make a bunch of turns. So that's a pretty big change with the FE model of the 5070. And then why the 5070 Ti didn't have an FE, not really sure. But anyway, this one does. So it's still got the same floppy adapter for 12-volt high power. Seems to be a higher quality one than their last one. Anyway, this is more or less the same style construction where they've got these fatter sleeved set of cables and then the sense pins, except that this one's a dual 8-pin. And this PCB better be pretty damn small, otherwise I'm gonna wonder why there's not just 2 8-pins on here. All right, so that's the basics. Really not a lot that is diverging other than the big thing, which was the size, but all the small stuff's the same. So they've still got this angled slot where we tested this in Schlieren imaging and saw that it actually does push the air away. So on the top, we saw that it would push the air at a, I guess it would be about a 30-degree angle or something out of the card and away from a glass panel and up towards the CPU heatsink. So that stuff remains more or less the same. Let's take some measurements. All right, sizing, pretty quick and simple on this. So we'll go for the fans first. Fans are 90 mil as opposed to, these are 115 or so outer diameter. So 115 versus 90, that's a huge difference already, and has an acoustic impact too. These were spinning a little bit faster as well, which makes sense because they're smaller. Some interesting shapes going on down here. I'd love to get Malcolm's input on why NVIDIA did these shapes. I'm sure knowing his engineering on this and his thermal team has been probably one of the most sound things they've done in terms of the thermal and acoustic profile for this launch. NVIDIA's got them to thank for some kind of salvage, but there's some interesting stuff here where you can see it's scooped down a little bit to just barely clear the edge of this fan, but then they've got this almost like pentalobe driver style, how's that for an obscure reference, notch down here, up here in the corners, so right there. So they're flexing it out in some ways, kind of interesting looking. But let's go ahead and take this apart. If this is the same as the others, then I've found it's easiest to try and wedge like a guitar pick in here, the kind you get with repair kits. But that might be a little bit too, tightly on there this time. So my experience has been that this is the easiest way to start. Once we get that in there, next step is to try and get a plastic, basically pry bar in. I'm not sure what the name of this tool is, but it's getting there. So if you look down here, you can see there's starting to form an opening. So what I'm going to do is lever this down and then shove the pry bar in. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. They've gotten better at this. The screwless design still has a lot of screws, but it's a lot less than the amount of screws they had on the 20 series, which was like 78 or something. There was like one screw per RT op. All right, we got to do, I skipped a step. We need to remove, speaking of screwless, we need to remove a screw that's hidden under this. So this is going to be a Torx 9, I think it is. First, you need vice grips to get your Torx 9 driver out. And try to do it without damaging the end of the bit. Yeah, I really wonder why they discontinued that toolkit. I actually really like the bits in it. It's really good. I think they just killed it because of the way they get stuck. All right, so backplate comes out. Screw almost falls off table, driver I mean. And then there's the next screw. So that needs to come out. You can tell it's this one because it's the only one that's separated and isolated. That's holding in the frame that we were in the process of popping out. Torx 6, which we have in the GN toolkit on store.gamersnexus.net. All right, it looks like it does nothing, but what it actually does is this. All right, so that is the X-frame, as NVIDIA calls it, or at least the exterior part of the X-frame. It doesn't really do anything. It just kind of holds everything or hides the screws. So now we're going to take out the next 4, which are these 4. That'll release these 2 triangular pieces. Now I would be tracking the screws on our screw tracking grid, but if we pan over to the screw tracking grid, currently it is tracking screws for a card I took apart 3 months ago. This thing, man, I don't know if this is going back together. This is going to be exceedingly difficult. Which is why, if you were like me, you should get your own mod mat on store.gamersnexus.net. Okay, a couple more screws. So there's 1 screw in here, 1 screw down here. Oh, there it goes. Okay, cool. All right. So more or less the same thing we've seen before. Looks like just a complete aluminum piece. Notches in, and then it acts as a sort of a flow guide. And part of what... Yeah, okay, this is pretty interesting. So if you look down here into the fin stack, you can actually see they're pointed in a way that allows them to flow across that 12-volt high power connector, which is definitely intentional. I mean, that's... Even though this is warmed air, because the fin stack is warm and the air is pushing through it and moving that above ambient air across the 12-volt high power connector, active cooling is going to be better than nothing. It's probably almost certainly cooler than the connector itself, that air. So that's providing some active airflow over the connector. Now we got to take this off. I think this comes off first. I mean, it's pretty cool, like how these cards slot together. It is really, credit to NVIDIA for all their fuck-ups in the last 3 months, especially. The mechanical and thermal design on the new FE cards is actually, I mean, I'm going to give them credit, is actually really cool how they put it together. So anyway, and we need to get the PCIe slot out of here. So it looks like it is going to still use the style NVIDIA went with for the 5080 and 5090. This is really interesting to me because from what I can see, it's not a full flow through. So we'll learn more about that in a second. Meaning, in other words, they probably could have gone for a more traditional PCB with the PCIe slot that's part of it. So we'll have to see if they've offset it in a way that benefits them still. All right. So this metal is just a retention clip. And you can see it's got these guideposts, which we're going to carefully pop it off. Yep. There's the pinout. So that is NVIDIA's internal PCIe slot adapter, which creates the actual PCIe slot. Last couple screws here. So these are all Torx 6, which again we have in our driver kit on the store. I think this is the point at which this back plate should pop off. Oh, there's a couple more screws on this one. There's one hidden down there. And another one up here. So that's a little bit different. Ah, interesting. Okay. So first bit of good news for the backplate. This wasn't like the best cooler we've ever seen, but it's a lot better than what NVIDIA has done in the past for these smaller coolers. And this is great. I mean, seeing use out of the backplate is always excellent. They've actually finned it for surface area, so that's nice to see. It's a big aluminum block. You might as well use the surface area. And then here they've got thermal pads to connect to the backside of these capacitors, so you can see the kind of canvasy marks on top of the capacitors. That connects to the thermal pads. Looks like that's the only thing they're sinking into this, so they're not directly contacting with a thermal pad the back of the GPU to the back plate. Curious if that would do anything or not. One thing that I'm thinking though is I do kind of wonder if they wanted to gain the vertical, well, in this orientation, gain the vertical area, the volume here, to pull these fins out on the Z-axis and create this surface area, because one of the reasons that NVIDIA might have used a slot adapter anyway, despite not doing a dual flow through, is maybe because it allows them to seat the PCB further that way towards the other part of the motherboard and make some more use, gain a little bit of area over here to fin that. So I'm not sure if that's why they did it, but that might be one of the possible benefits. All right, we got to disconnect cables now. So these are those flex, or whatever they're called, cables. All right, fan number 1. That one's a little tricky. Okay. Now the 4 screws for the GPU come out. Credit to NVIDIA, there does not appear to be a tamper seal on anything. Tamper seals aren't illegal, but warranty void stickers are unenforceable in the US. Although, like any consumer right, you'd have to actually know you have it. So no springs on the screws themselves. That has seemingly gone away this generation. But they're just using this giant, well, relatively large leaf spring instead. So that's serving most of that spring purpose. Got these huge bars on the back of the 12-volt high power. And I think we can just pull this straight up and out now. This is always the part where I'm like, did I miss a screw? Or is the thermal pad paste just really secure? Nice. Look at that. There's a different color one this time. What does it mean? Has NVIDIA? Uh-oh. There's 2 different color ones. They don't match. Is NVIDIA on hard times? We've got the headlines here. It's time to get the question marks out. Has NVIDIA run out of money? Question mark. I don't really have any other ones. That was the best one I had. That was the most sensational one I had. I'm sorry. So they've got the canvasy ones. Again, it's like that Fuji Poly style. If you wanted to replace it, those look like about 1 millimeter. I'll measure them in a second. They compress a lot. This is a much thicker pad, but that's on 2 inductors. So you see that right there. That's 2 inductors, part of the VRM. It might be a set of memory stages, but we'd have to DMM it. And then for the memory itself, they're using the canvasy pads. They've got another one of those taller, less compressible, sort of squishy pads up near, what is that on? It's probably on an inductor. That looks like it's on this inductor right here, this LR22. So that's what they're doing for the heat sink. And check out that 12-volt high power. So massive bars straight into the PCB. And that is exactly what you see on, actually, there's a good comparison. So, some of the cost here, other than the GPU itself, this is the 5080 PCB and more or less the 5090 PCB. And then this is the 5070 PCB. So a little more traditional. It's still not fully traditional. I mean, it's still got the PCIe riser thing on it and adapter. And then it's more similar to that older 3080 style. There's no liquid metal. There wasn't any on the 5080 either. That's a 5090 only thing. And then this PCB density is insane. I mean, the amount of stuff they put on this board, it's crazy how much is on this 5080, 5090 PCB. And I think that's part of why NVIDIA is not doing 2 12-volt high power connectors, because they want that area. But we'll talk about this another time, but we'd really like to see 2 for that extra safety margin. Anyway, very big difference. The connector itself, though, it looks like they're using the same supply. So it's got that same 2 large conductors on it. All right, there's the die. Let's get a look at that. So it says GB205-300-A1. So for NVIDIA's nomenclature, the GB, that's going to be Grace Blackwell, I guess. But the 205 part, so as they increment the 3rd digit and the 3-digit skew, so 200, they increment it higher. It's going to be a lower end card. It'll be a little confusing. 200 would be the largest variant they have for the server stuff. 202, 203 is what you start seeing appear on the high-end consumer. So anyway, that's a 205 300A1. 300 sort of a sub-skew identifier. And yeah, that's the GPU. Should probably do die size, I guess. Measuring die size with calipers is imperfect because in this measurement, I'm going to actually trying to add some like educational value here, since this is a card I don't know how many people care about, but you get the diffusion barrier. So the silicon itself is actually a little bit below the shiny part we see. Roman always told me that this was called a diffusion barrier. I mean, he told me that like 10 years ago. I don't know if his opinions changed, but it's like a structural piece. And so when you measure that, it's going to be a little bit larger than the actual silicon itself underneath, like the actual active silicon. So that's 14.5 by roughly 19. So that's more or less the die area. Just for comparison, this information's online, but we'll just do it like for like here. So the 5080 die is way smaller than the 5090 die. That's 25.4, already bigger, by like 15.6 or so. Die size is going to dictate most of the cost. Let's look at the cooler a little more. Not much to look at here, but much more traditional style. So this still appears to be a PTM phase change pad. Traditional copper cold plate, just a flat copper plate. They've got what look to be traditional heat pipes. I don't think this is a vapor chamber. I'm not. I'll ask Malcolm to make sure. If it is, then I guess we'll cut that statement. So if it makes it in, then it's not a vapor chamber. So I don't think that's vapor chamber. And then the heat pipes, it looks like we've got 2 right here running across. I don't know if that might just barely not touch the die for the lower one. And then another one going across here. So that's the 3 heat pipes. There's a 4th one right here going down and probably making a turn. And then this part is flow through. It's got the same carved out scoop here, which thermal engineer Malcolm explains in our interview with him why that exists. It has to do with pressure drop. Is a really good explanation. I can't do it justice, so you should check out that video. And then these 2 screws on the end are just for supports for system integrators. So I think that's going to be it. I mean, very similar in some ways, some pretty interesting ways. The PCIe adapter was not something I would have expected to see on the cheapest of their models. It's like, it's not low end, but 550 is like a quarter of the price. Well, quarter of the MSRP of the 5090. So interesting that they decided to do that. And paste debris. Interesting that they decided to do that, but otherwise, that's the teardown. Like I said, you know, happy to give them credit where they do stuff well or interestingly. The cooler remains one of them. In our thermal testing for the review, it was in like the 72, 73 degree range for the GPU temperature, if I remember correctly. Memory was more than acceptable, it's in the 70s as well. And so because the card is low power consumption, they can get away with a smaller cooler. And it does appear like, I mean, NVIDIA has objectively improved in its cooler design, even when it's not doing a dual flow through. So they get complete credit for that, despite the other stuff we've been talking about lately. And just to kind of keep that perspective of not everything's bad with the stuff that NVIDIA is working on. So it just sometimes feels that way, depending on how big the issue is. So pretty huge difference, though, between these two in size. But that's going to be it for the teardown. If nothing else, hopefully you learned something interesting or at least got some entertainment value out of it when I was showing you how you need pliers and vice grips to remove bits from the wooden box. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersaccess.net to grab a mod mat like the one I used or a toolkit like the one I was using on the store. Not one with a wooden box, one with a roll bag so the tools don't get stuck in it. Or go to the channel and check out the 5070 review. And depending on when you see this, the 9070 and the XT reviews might be live or they're going live very soon. So check back for that. Subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.